Buildings long left abandoned, and for good reason. Many of these places have had a violent history, strange happenings, and are downright creepy. Here are the top 15 most creepy abandoned places. Number 15. The Sathorn Unique Building. Originally planned to be a high-rise residential tower, the Sathorn Unique Building in Bangkok, Thailand was almost 80% complete by the time of 1997 and the Asian financial crisis, at which point construction was stopped and hasn't resumed since. At 49 stories high and covering a land area of 34,000 square feet, it's by far the most prominent of all the abandoned structures in the city and has become somewhat of a focus for urban explorers. They gain access by bribing the security guards that still patrol the premises, and once inside have free reign over the incomplete interior. There's a mysterious aura about this place though, and as well as being graffitied and vandalized in recent years, it's become associated with crime and mysterious deaths. Several bodies have been found inside, with no obvious reasons how these people met their end, which raises the question of whether it's the building that's unsafe, or if it's another force at work. Number 14. St. George's Church, Lukova. In the right circumstances, virtually any church has the ability to give off creepy vibes. But if you ever decide to visit St. George's Church in Lukova in the Czech Republic, you'd better have nerves of steel. Because in the 14th century, it was the center of village life for hundreds of years. In 1968, however, during a funeral service, part of the roof collapsed, and this was seen as a bad omen by locals. That was the last time a service was held indoors, and over the following years, everything of value was looted from the building. In 2014, though, a professor at a nearby university asked his students to find an abandoned church for an art installation, which led them to choosing St. George's as the perfect location. And what came next may make the dilapidated building far more frightening than ever before. They built a series of ghostly, life-size figures, which were placed in the pews around the building, in what has become one of the scariest church experiences you're ever likely to encounter. After it was opened, people came from across Europe to see it for themselves, and it's hoped that it'll allow the church custodians to raise enough money to actually fix the roof that had been damaged so long ago. Number 13. Bodie Ghost Town. During the Californian gold rush in the late 19th century, thousands of people flocked to the area in the hope that they too could get in on the action. To support all the newcomers, new towns sprung up around the region, including Bodie, which is in the Sierra Nevada mountain range around 75 miles southeast of Lake Tahoe. It was founded in 1876 and soon had a population of around 7,000 people. Over the next 30 years, though, as gold deposits dried up, people began to move away, and Bodie was declared a ghost town by 1915. It has since been designated as a National Historic Landmark and has 200,000 visitors each year, all of whom want the chance to see how life in a gold boom town was like. Only 110 of the original buildings still remain, and it's a creepy sight to see. The stores still have products on the shelves, the homes are still full of belongings, and even trash that littered the streets is still there, with it being illegal to remove anything. Number 12. SS Airfield. People have been sailing the oceans for centuries, and while many vessels are either scrapped or sunk, some have gone on to become very different than they were originally built for. In Australia's Homebush Bay, you can see one such ship, the SS Airfield, which was constructed in 1911 as a good transport vessel, but after being wrecked following the Second World War, has now become overrun by mangroves and looks like a floating forest. There's more to this place than just a wreck, however. The bay was once a hive of economic activity for the area, and there were transporters that would deliver coal, oil, and various other supplies. During an accident, though, the bay became contaminated with toxic waste and was soon abandoned due to the potential health risks. Those vessels that were there at the time, including the SS Airfield, were just left to rust in the water, and it was only until the lead up to the 2000 Olympic Games that the site was renovated. By then, the airfield had already begun being consumed by the mangroves, and one day they'll cause so much structural damage to it that it'll fall apart and be washed away for good. Number 11. Bannerman's Castle. If you've ever traveled past Polapel Island in the Hudson River near New York, chances are you might have seen what remains of Bannerman's Castle. It was built by Francis Bannerman, who bought the island in 1900, originally as a place to store ammunition that he acquired for sale through his military surplus business. In the following years, his company did extremely well, and he began to build structures on the island, including the castle. His death in 1918 saw an end to its development, and an explosion of 200 pounds of shells in one section of the building condemned it to lay empty ever since. The island is now designated as being off-limits, and the castle lies in ruins. Despite efforts being made to remove all of the dangerous equipment from within it, there's still a good chance that there are still explosives hidden somewhere, and despite best attempts by authorities, explorers and trespassers still regularly manage to walk through the site. As it's been empty for over a century, it's both an important historical monument and a creepy abandoned structure that could pose a danger to anyone who sets foot there. Number 10. Ponyhenge. In Lincoln, Massachusetts, there's a place that's just as mysterious as it is creepy, because not only does no one know how it got there, but it keeps growing. Known as Ponyhenge, it's a small field on the outskirts of the town that's covered in broken rocking horses, plastic ponies, and various other horse-related objects. To make things even more confusing, they aren't just randomly strewn about, but are arranged in specific shapes. They first began appearing in 2010, and since then hundreds have appeared. And occasionally they're moved around into a different orientation, sometimes in circles, and sometimes in rows like at a racing track. Not even the family who owns the land know who's responsible for it, and the deteriorated state of each of the objects give off an ominous vibe. It's thought that the first may have been left after a kid's lemonade stand was built by the side of the road, and that since then people have used it as a place to dispose of their equine possessions. But until the person behind the ever-growing collection comes forward, it'll remain a mystery. Number 9. The Eastern State Penitentiary. Located in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, the Eastern State Penitentiary was one of the most renowned prisons in America, and was where Al Capone and Willie Sutton were held. It was operational between 1829 and 1971, and in many ways pioneered prison design around the world. In fact, at least 300 institutions are known to have been based on this one, which had a wagon wheel design that could accommodate up to 400 inmates. When it opened, it was the biggest and most costly public building that had ever been built in the U.S., and is long believed to have been the site of a number of atrocities, especially as the location of the state's death row. Today, it's a museum, which runs regular tours for visitors who are interested in how the prison used to be run. Amongst true stories of prison murders and violence, as well as hosting an annual Halloween party, it's become less a place of incarceration and more about scaring anyone who enters. The creepy atmosphere has made it a popular destination for ghost hunters, and visitors often report hearing strange noises and screams echoing in the halls. We are constantly adding more people to the Top 5's production team to bring you all the best content. Be sure to subscribe with notifications on and hit the like button. Number 8. Humberstone, Chile. The Atacama Desert in South America is a notoriously hostile environment for humans. But during the late 19th and early 20th centuries, it was the world's largest source of saltpeter, which is a mineral that is vital to the production of fertilizer and other various uses. To support the demand, several towns were built in the desert in Chile, including Humberstone, which opened in 1872. Originally known as La Palma, and at its height had as many as 3,500 residents, all of whom relied on the grueling saltpeter industry, which required long, tough days out in the unforgiving sun with very little water or shade. By the beginning of the First World War, however, exports of saltpeter to Germany were banned, and this led German scientists to develop synthetic alternatives, which essentially collapsed all demand for the natural substance. Towns like Humberstone were abandoned when residents were forced to move elsewhere in search of work, and it became a ghost town. Now you can still see lots of the buildings, which still contain the supplies from the last days the town was in use. The remains of a hotel can also be seen, as well as various pieces of machinery that litter the area. To see somewhere like this that was abandoned in its prime is a creepy experience, and one that the authorities are hoping to capitalize on by encouraging tourism to the region. Number 7. Presidio Modelo. Supposedly a modern prison, the Presidio Modelo on the Isla del Pinos in Cuba was built between 1926 and 1928, with the capacity to hold up to 2,500 inmates. Made up of 5 circular blocks, it was where all the rebels and political prisoners were held, including Fidel Castro in the 1950s. Quite often, more people would be kept here than intended, and occasionally there would be as many as 6,000 prisoners, which led to extremely cramped conditions and abhorrent behavior from both those that were incarcerated and the guards. Numerous riots and hunger strikes were organized to campaign for better conditions, but it would only be in 1967 that it would finally be closed, 8 years after Castro came into power. Today, the structure is still there and is a national monument. Tourists can take guided tours to see the conditions that prisoners were kept in, and it soon becomes clear how awful a place this truly was. Number 6. Belitz Military Hospital. Not only does the Belitz Military Hospital feel creepy because of the deteriorating structure itself, but its history within Germany makes it even more ominous. It was constructed in 1898, and between then and 1930, the complex of 60 buildings was used to treat patients with fatal lung diseases like tuberculosis. It was used as a field hospital during the First World War for German troops suffering from conditions linked to the use of mustard gas, and reprised this role during the Second World War. It was here that Adolf Hitler was treated during World War I after being blinded by a British gas attack at the Somme. And when he was in power, it was used to treat and rehabilitate the most important members of the Nazi regime. In 1945, it was taken over by Soviet troops who used it as a military hospital until 1995. But in the following years, virtually all of the buildings were shut down and abandoned. With medical devices still present in the halls, it's an intense place to walk through, as you can only imagine the traumatic injuries of previous patients and the horrific experiments some of the doctors would have carried out here. Due to the lack of security, it became a popular site for urban explorers, but in 2015 a canopy was installed to encourage tourists to visit and see the entire complex from a distance. Number 5. Lee Plaza. The 15-story Lee Plaza building in Detroit, Michigan was built in 1929 to be an upscale apartment complex that blurred the line between residential units and hotel services. It's a great example of Art Deco architecture, but due to the Great Depression, the owners were unable to carry out their dream, and it would go on to change hands a number of times. Legal disputes ensued, and those residents that had moved in eventually left, leading the city authorities to take over and turn it into a retirement complex. Even this proved unfeasible, though, and the building was closed in 1997 and has been abandoned ever since. Plans are underway to redevelop it, but in the meantime, it's become a popular place for urban explorers who are keen to take a look around the crumbling structure, which is like walking back into the past. The unfinished nature of some of the floors, along with the number of possessions that were left behind by former residents who died in the building, means that while on the face of it, there doesn't seem to be anything too scary about Lee Plaza. The more you look into the stories around it, the more creepy it becomes. Number 4. Pavlovsk Submarine Base. During the Cold War, forces on both sides built countless military bases from where attacks could be launched. In some cases, it's only been recently that some of these facilities that have long since been abandoned have come to light, and it can be a sobering thought to see how dangerous they actually were. One of the most famous is the Pavlovsk Submarine Base in Russia. This vast network of tunnels was carved deep into the cliffs and was designed to be a nuclear shelter for Soviet submarines that were part of the Pacific Ocean Fleet. Construction began in the 1960s, but so vast was the project that by the 1980s, it still wasn't finished, and works were ended. The tunnels have been untouched in the years since, but interestingly, people who have been there say it was virtually finished and could quite easily be refitted should the need ever arise. The thought that there could be further places like this still hidden around the world, and that from sites like this not only could fleets be protected, but could also plan strikes against other countries is a terrifying one, and one that will surely send shivers down your spine if you ever have the chance to walk the tunnels. Number 3. Rummu Prison. Rummu Prison was established in Estonia by the Soviet Union in the 1940s, and its location was chosen because it was right next to a limestone quarry where the prisoners would be forced to work. It was a place that was dreaded by locals, and very few who were sent there would ever return. And it was only in 1991, when Estonia gained independence from the Soviet Union, that the prison and the nearby quarry became abandoned. With the lack of upkeep of the area, the groundwater began to swell up, and a brand new lake formed which covered all of the mining equipment, and even some of the former prison structures. Strangely, today the quarry that was a place of pain and torture for so many people is now a popular recreational diving spot, where it's possible to swim into the water and explore the ruins. Far from being a place of excitement, it's a chance for reflection about the way things once were, and most people can't help but be creeped out by the experience. Number 2. San Juan Parangari-Cutiro. In 1943, near the town of San Juan Parangari-Cutiro in Mexico, a cornfield began to rise into the air as a new volcano emerged and began to release huge quantities of lava and ash. It's said that on that day, 2 miles away in the town, the bells of the church began to dance, and this would act as a warning that danger was on its way. Luckily for residents, the lava was slow-moving, and it would take a year before it reached the stone walls of the settlement, giving plenty of time to escape. But it did eventually destroy the entire place, apart from the church and the altar. They still stand to this day and are a peculiar sight. The church is half buried beneath the solidified lava, and behind it you can now see the distinct cone of one of the world's newest formed volcanoes. The church has become a valuable tourist destination for the locals, with large numbers of people wanting to see the remains of the building. But there's a danger with visiting this particular place, because the volcano is still active and could begin to erupt at any time. Number 1. The Great Train Graveyard. If you're ever traveling through Bolivia, high up on the Andean plain, you might just come across the Great Train Graveyard, which is one of the creepiest and most bizarre collections of abandoned objects in the world. And that's because it's full of locomotives, which have decayed far faster than normal because of the salt winds that blast through the region. Dating back to the early 20th century, there are at least 100 train cars there, most of which had been imported from Britain. Originally, they were destined to be part of Bolivia's grand new railway that would have connected the country with those surrounding it. But because of political disagreements and escalating costs, the project was abandoned. Rather than transporting the trains somewhere else to be used, they were instead simply abandoned where they stood, and they remain in the exact same place to this day. Subscribe to Top 5s for more and check out some of our other popular videos.